Haram and just everything being about the black and white, but also that can sometimes be symptomatic of just doing what it boils down to almost an attitude of, oh, I'll do what's allowed, and we're almost always, it's as if we're aiming down all the time. Okay, this issue is technically permissible, and therefore we're not going to talk about that anymore, rather than, I would say, why aren't we looking at the concept of ihsan and excellence? Why aren't we saying, okay, this issue is complicated, and yes, there are areas which are difficult and something may be technically permissible under this scholarly opinion, but actually, is that where we want to go, or is there something that would be much more beneficial for our community, which is also permissible, but actually is more suitable, and we're aiming at excellence rather than always at the halal haram boundary and all that's makruh, but we could just, do you know what I mean? So instead of focusing on the weaker rulings or the weak or not even rulings, just our attitude and what we're aiming for, perhaps if we can go for excellence, then we can transform
the rigid ways
and of understanding our own roles and who we are and our identities, and just having the confidence. I mean, the identity issue, I think it all boils down to confidence about who we are as Muslims and who we can be, and again, not being prescriptive, but supporting each other. I think as humans, we're always very quick to condemn each other and say, oh, you know, they're not that kind of Muslim, or oh, it's a liberal Muslim or a conservative Muslim. We have labels that we fire at each other, and it's not particularly constructive, and it's certainly, I mean, we've got enough problems without doing it to ourselves.
Can I drive that point home, and no puns intended, driving for women, 26th of October. I mean, quite interesting. Seriously, a group of women in Saudi Arabia with a level of education that is not less than average decide through social media, you know, Twitter and Facebook and whatever, to choose 26th of October. It was my birthday, by the way. It's quite interesting to go for it, and asking for the media to cover that issue. It didn't substantiate, but the issue of testing the boundaries and pushing for it did, you know, give the ground for discussion, further discussions. Yet, when you read remarks in regards to comments about, you know, articles written within that theme, you can't imagine the, obscenity and how offensive certain words were used to describe those women. Yet you think about, they're just trying to ask for the government to legislate and issue some kind of regulations for a God-given right of freedom to move around, when one of them wants to go to her school to teach our children, or to go to hospital to treat women and men. And you think about, you know, that particular topic in itself shows how rigid the society can be, and losing a lot in terms of being better Muslims. I don't know. I mean,
it's as if we missed the point.
A series of question marks.
In response to that event that happened, you know, some scholars got together and they came up with a document with a list of reasons why we cannot allow women to drive. One of the reasons was it would increase homosexuality in Saudi Arabia.
I don't know how to see that, but, you know, I think Stephanie had something.
Yeah, I know, like, two kind of issues which have repeatedly been brought up. First of all, one of labeling and one of identity construction. And I think that one of the big issues that, like, we as a whole world really are faced with is the issue of we create our identities in terms of the other. We always differentiate us from others, and instead of that, I think there should be more of an emphasis in creating an identity that focuses on inclusion, on what you have in common with others. And I think you said that earlier as well, that it's more of a matter of not looking at differences, but looking at commonalities. And the other thing is the labeling, like the labeling of feminism and how that is used. You mentioned that in your in your talk as well about how that is used politically, both by the West and by Arab leaders in the community. I was reading about the history of Arab feminism and how it is often used as like saying it's an evil feminist kind of, evil Western kind of thought infiltrating. And that, again, then leads back to the idea of identity and how you then, the identity, because it is the other invading, and then you become defensive, and like you were saying as well. And I think that we have to like move beyond the labels of, you know, just feminism being an evil thing or a good thing, and just kind of look more like individual events and activities and actions, more grassroots, like you were saying, and kind of move beyond the identity of, or an identity definition of being a different one, and more of kind of like a hybrid identity, more. Like you were saying, here in the UK, Muslims in the UK, Muslims in Europe, in the US, wherever, there are differences to Muslims wherever you go, and the same that applies to non-Muslims, and you can't really, I think that in today's world, there's too much mobility, there's too many people moving around, traveling, learning different things. There's education systems are emerging, lines are becoming more blurred, and it's really difficult to them, or it's wrong to try and cling on to like a definition that no longer has the same boundaries as it once had. And I think that maybe some emphasis should be on that.
Definitely. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Could I just add to that? I think everyone thinks I've got a microphone fever, and I think I might need to get a prescription for it as soon as I leave. But I think a good starting point for us in terms of building identity and contextualizing our experience in the UK is actually going back to an Andalusian point.
They were in Spain, yeah, unfortunately.
I think that's a start, and we shouldn't be using modern Middle East as a perspective as a starting point. If anything, we should be looking at the European experience of Muslims, the Turkish, and in particular the Andalusian experience of Muslim Spain as a starting point of our reference point to understand our identity moving forward.
And they ruled for 7 centuries
Yes.
in that part of the world. So, again, it shows how, living in harmony for
and there's some great
what
books
about
out there, so
Barry?
you can start reading it cheap on Amazon.
Right. We can possibly entertain one more remark or comment or question or point of criticism, please. No? Yes?
Sorry to keep asking. What would be a few good selection of books that you recommend on the dialogue between the role of women, feminism, and the role of women in the Islamic framework? A sort of dialogue between these three topics and the dynamic of these three topics.
Should you show your publications?
Yes.
Because I think...
Oh, mine. No, not mine. No, I was thinking... I wrote one essay once which brought out the complicated bit. There, that one at the bottom, actually that was just me trying to make definitions and differences within the Islamic framework about feminism. So it's really basic, but that might be useful in terms of actually the different kinds of feminist perspectives that get labelled Islamic feminism, which are actually quite different. So there might be someone like Azza Karam, who's from an Egyptian background, and she looks at the people like Zainab al-Ghazali, who come from quote-unquote Islamist backgrounds, so the kind of Muslim Brotherhood, and to what extent women's activities and women's activism in that context is or isn't feminist, versus someone like Amina Wadud. I definitely, for all the controversies around her, definitely recommend you read her work, because she is so impassioned that she's coming from an Islamic framework, and she does challenge things, but she's doing it in a way that gets people's backs up a lot, but in a way, Amina Wadud, I would definitely, and Asma Balas as well, from those kind of reformist feminist perspectives. They believe that interpretations of our scholars have been male-centric, and therefore we need to return to the texts in order to come out with new inclusive interpretations. Now, again, that's quite a controversial perspective, but it's something certainly Asma Balas does in a perhaps more even Keisha Ali. Read Keisha Ali. She does something about sexual ethics in Islam, and again, it's a challenging read. And she addresses contemporary issues that come up in the West about exactly what equality is, and issues around sexuality, those kind of things that we shy away from talking about. But actually, at least it opens a conversation.
Sadawi has things in English.
Yeah,
I'm not
no,
sure,
yes,
but in
yes,
Arabic,
Sadawi. And
But-
Khalid Abu al-Fadl as well, I would say, is interesting because he's very thorough on those issues. Khalid Abu al-Fadl.
It's funny you ask for this, and Impact in Islam, Impact, the university publication for those who are part of the University of Nottingham, had an article related to activism and students, and whether students of this generation are no longer thinking about this empowering way of changing policies and discussing issues and so on. And part of that article touched upon feminism and talking about, whether it's in its third wave or not, and how much it has accomplished, globally speaking, not just, Islamically or, within Europe. And it's quite interesting when you read facts and figures in regards to, it hasn't done a lot. When you think about, living wage related for humans in general versus women,
we still don't, even I wouldn't
Yes.
choose this university, but there are issues even within our institutions in this country about equal pay. Yeah. Just going back, I'm thinking Hassan Turabi, again, a very controversial figure. What I love about him is that he's coming from that so-called Islamist background and that political as well as scholarly background, but he is really radical on gender and talking about it and saying, we've become sort of, well, it's quite insulting.
He's a funny dog, because I remember him on Al Jazeera saying, by the way, it's live broadcast, and I'm not sure whether I'm going home after this or not. So
that's the way I think he lives. Yeah. But definitely read his work on women. I think it's powerful, and again, coming from a very different perspective from someone like Ahmed Meliebary, but he's radical in his own way, and coming from a very strong tradition. Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat who that was?
Hassan At-Turabi.
He's Sudanese, and there's quite a lot of his texts just available free on the internet. I'm just trying to remember. If you Google, I think he calls it women in Islam or gender in Islam and Turabi, it should come up, and you can actually access some of the English translations.
Is there any chance of publishing a list of this readings, maybe on Facebook or something, if we compile a list after,
Yeah, I'll put something, I must have. Definitely, Farouk.
Him on Facebook.
Can I just add? A book I find useful is the late Sheikh Ramadan Houthi. He recently had a political assassination about 2-3 months ago. Wrote a very intriguing set of essays, and he called it Women Between the Tyranny of the West and the Mercy of Islam. It's an interesting read. I recommend it as a good starting point.
Okay, I think with that we could possibly ask our guest speakers to say any final remarks if they want to. And,
I just want to quickly thank you all for coming today, and I think one thing that I really like all of you, particularly as women, to take away with you is that at the end of the day, the action lies with you. It's just with me, with you. Nobody's going to give us our rights. As long as we look back to our history, what Islam gives us, what Allah gives us, and then we go for it. Just like with that example, if that woman could stand up to Hazrat Umar, that's a great example for us. So we need to take the action. We need to just empower ourselves and tell ourselves we can do it. and with the brothers here to support the women who are in your lives. It's a journey for you and those women around you.
Absolutely. Well, join the HIMMAH Leadership Programme. That's my final point on this. And thank you, and keep in touch, and yeah, let's keep discussing stuff.
Thank you.
So, Pascal.
The last round.